We've been looking for quite some time, working our way through looking at God's character. And most sermons will be no different, certainly not today's. We've looked through the Old Testament, going through showing the character of God, the Father, and now we've worked in showing the character of Jesus to show, as Jesus said, that those are one and the same. Today we're going to be in the book of John. Now John is an interesting book. John has 21 chapters, 879 verses, over 15,000 words. You have, from beginning to end, you have these beautiful writings, right? All of the apostles who wrote letters all had different styles. They had different backgrounds. And then you had people, Luke had a very unique background. John, writes very poetic and flowery and flowing from the very beginning. And we have all of these great verses and chapters and sermons and lessons out of John. John 1, in the beginning, John ties it immediately that Jesus is and has always been, showing that he is in fact God, that Jesus is I am. You have John 3, one of the most recited verses in all of Scripture. All of these parts in John. There's one chapter in John that gets very few sermons on it, which is where we're going to attempt to look today. So once you get done with John chapter 1 and you move into John chapter 2, you have Jesus turning water into wine. Now, I ran this by a couple people as I was preparing for the sermons. I got all kinds of interesting suggestions for sermon titles for today, most of them country music song titles. ZZ Top was thrown in there once or twice. All kinds of catchy titles you could use for today. But we're going to look at this instance of Jesus turning water into wine, and we're going to look at what happened, what that's all about, why that's even included, and what we can kind of take away from this. So if you'll turn to John chapter 2, go with me here. In John chapter 1, as I said, it starts out, John says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And he goes on and he sets it up immediately that Jesus is the divine. If you look at the end of John chapter 1, in around verse 43, Jesus is calling a couple disciples. The one that we're worried about here, just for our purposes today, is Nathanael. Philip goes and tells Nathanael, Jesus calls Philip. Philip goes and tells Nathanael, we found the Messiah. We found the guy. Philip found Nathanael, starting verse 45, and said to him, "We have found him whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Nathanael has a great response right here. Nathanael looks at him and says, "Nazareth? Really?" Says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" That's his initial response to this. This is, you're living in Knoxville and you're like, can anything possibly good come from Oliver Springs? I can say that. I was born in Oliver Springs. Philip said to him, "Come and see for yourself." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said, "Behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael said to him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered him like a card table trick, right? Like he gives the fortune ball answer. He's like, just to prove that he can actually see. He said, "I saw you." It says, "I saw you before Philip called you when you were under the fig tree by yourself. I saw you." And Nathanael answered him, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Verse 50, Jesus answers and basically tells him, "Man, you are really easily impressed. So because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, you believe? You will see greater things than these." Stand by. He said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." That's important, and we'll come back to that. All right. John chapter 2. Let's look at the first 5 verses, and then we'll talk our way through this. On the third day, there was a wedding, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Really weird conversation. Really bizarre conversation. First thing to know is that we're at a wedding. And a wedding at this point in time and this location does not in any way resemble a wedding that we have here. A wedding that we have here, I was talking to someone and they were talking about, how amazing their reception was because, they finished the wedding and the guests and everybody hung out for like 5 hours afterwards. Okay, these weddings are like a week. They're about a week long. These people worked hard all the time. Life was hard, and this was a celebration. And they would celebrate for about a week for a wedding. So this is what's happening right here. This is the wedding that we're at. This statement about the mother of Jesus being there, later on in this story, we will see that she's not just there. Has anybody ever helped in any capacity with a wedding before, putting on someone's wedding of any kind? Yeah. All right. So one of the greatest lies ever told by brides and grooms is, "Do you have a wedding coordinator?" They all say yes, and almost all of them are lying. We show up to the wedding and no one has any idea what they're doing, and usually Aaron is doing it or I'm pretending to do it and then goes and gets Aaron to fix it. So either this is Mary, right? Mary's at this wedding and she's been roped into being the coordinator, which is one possibility. There's also some really cool stories and Jewish legend, right? Like there's an apocryphal writing that says that Mary, Jesus' mom, is actually related to. She's family of this wedding. There's some Jewish legend that kind of takes that and goes further, and I really do mean that legend. There's no biblical basis to tie this in, but there's some legend even that this is John's wedding. Everyone pretty much agrees that John is an eyewitness. He's the only one who records this, and he gives such detail that everyone seems to agree that he's an eyewitness. But some people even say that this is his wedding. What we know is that Mary is highly involved. She has intimate knowledge of the happenings, of the goings-on, of the family, and she has some power in charge of the staff, the servants at this wedding. This is important. The end of verse 2, we finish up the end of verse 2, and it immediately starts out with that the wine ran out at the wedding. Now, this is important. This is actually a really big deal. Partly because wine was a huge part of these celebrations. And for a family to run out of wine before this was over was extremely embarrassing. Very, very, literally considered very shameful to have run out of wine before this was over. This is a big deal. And the shame of this would actually go to the bride and groom. It's a big deal. The little acronym out next, this is, the Jewish teenagers back then wore this on their bracelet, like WWJD. Not really. Here's the thing, though. This just goes to show what wine kind of meant. There really is a common Jewish saying, and it was a saying that the rabbis would use. This was a rabbinical saying that predates Jesus thousands of years, but it literally translates to, "Without wine, there is no joy." That is the saying. This is a Jewish saying. This is a rabbi saying, "Without wine, there is no joy." And I say that to reiterate again the importance of wine at this ceremony, why this was a big deal. Then you have Mary. Mary says they have no wine, with a period at the end. If you are married, you have no problem understanding what just happened here. If you are married, this is you are comfortably lying in bed. and your spouse next to you goes, I'm cold. They're not stating that for the walls to hear, right? There's an expectation that someone, you, are going to get up and do something about that. This is the same thing. Mary doesn't ask a question. She doesn't give details. She doesn't do anything. She walks up to Jesus and says, they have no wine. Here's where we get lost, though. Here's where we get lost. Because Jesus' response is, if you read it, most translations are going to get you really close to Jesus saying, woman, what does this have to do with me? If we're lying in bed, hypothetically, and Aaron goes, I'm cold. And my response is, woman, what's that got to do with me? You will read about me in the obituary section, right? And this is how we read Jesus saying this. And so we get totally lost and we derail the whole story. But look at this. Flip just for a second. We're going to come right back. But flip to John 19. John 19. This is one of the most beautiful exchanges that we see Jesus have. Jesus is dying on the cross, and he looks out, and literally his last words here are recorded as this. Jesus looks out, he's dying. When Jesus saw, verse 26, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, woman, behold your son. All right, go back. That's woman. Jesus is dying on the cross, and he looks out and he sees his mom and he says, woman, behold your son. One of the last thing he does before he dies is make sure that his mom is taken care of. And he looks at John and he says, John, meet your mother. At that moment, he calls Mary woman. This is a situation where oftentimes we read our culture and our verbiage onto something 2,000 years ago. This is the only place in Scripture that we do that, right? But this is one of those things. This is not, woman, what in the world has that got to do with me? But it's not mother either. It is a term of endearment, and it is a term of respect. But it's also not mother. So there's a couple ways you can look at this. One of them is you can look at Jesus and he's just saying, what do you want me to do? Because he follows with, he says, my hour is not yet come. It's not my time. What do you want me to do? Which is possible. I'm going to read it a little different and understand that you don't have to read it this way at all. This is not some, deeply fleshed out theory, okay? This is from the book of Levi's Opinions, all right? But here we go. When Jesus says this, it is a term of respect and endearment that he's saying to Mary, but it's not mother. I think when we read this, we can almost see Mary is coming up, and like I said, there's solid expectation on what she's wanting him to do. And I think Mary has in her head how this needs to go. I think Mary is excited. Mary's been waiting for this for a long time. Mary's been beaten up her entire life over people not believing. And I think at this point, Jesus, with loving endearment and respect, also says, but it is my decision. It's taken a little bit back from that mother-son, and he says, it's not my time yet. Let me decide how I handle this. And if you read the very next line, look at Mary's response. Mary just looks at the servants and she says, do whatever he tells you. Mary's not mad. She's not been out of shape. She's not beat up. She's not cowarding. She looks at the servants and she puts Jesus in charge. He's going to figure out how to handle this. You do whatever he tells you to do. All right, let's keep going. Verses 6 through 7. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification. Sounds a lot more beautiful than it is. Jewish rites of purification, as in you had a whole crowd full of people and everyone's feet were dirty. These were the foot washing basins, probably. They were each between 20 or 30 gallons, 6 of them. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. All right, spoiler alert, he turns it into wine. Here's the thing, if you look through this. I know, I ruined the whole movie. Here's this little section by the math, and then I'll talk about why we're doing it this way. But here's this by the math, okay? So there's 6 basins, and they're each 20 to 30 gallons, and it says they filled them to the brim. So that comes out to 180 gallons if you fill all 6 of these up to the brim. Comes out to 180 gallons. 180 gallons means that each of these, not total, each of these basins, each of these pots, whatever you want to call them, weighed about 250 pounds apiece just in water. Not counting the fact they said they're made out of stone. We always see this with the really beautiful pictures like the one that I've got in the bottom. But we're talking concrete vats is what we're thinking about here. Now, some of us work a lot better with visuals, all right? So I didn't pick this one by accident. It isn't like, oh, this is close or this is like, okay? Literally, this 5-person hot tub, this exact one in the picture, is 180 gallons, all right? That's what 180 gallons looks like. This is what Jesus could have turned this water into wine. My point is twofold. One is that a lot of times people get really lost on this and they miss any message that's brought in here because they're scared to death to deal with the fact that Jesus made wine. And you have people, I won't presume anybody in here, but you have people who will argue, oh, it was juice. Right, because Jesus first made a refrigerator and then he made it. But I want to show you the abundance that we're talking about here. A bottle of wine is 750 milliliters. So 180 gallons comes out to about 908 and a half bottles of wine. Bottles of wine. Understand that everyone else saw this too. In Luke, we'll continue the story and we'll read about that Jesus made wine and what Jesus did and why this all occurred. But Jesus himself talks about it in Luke. You can write it down or you can turn there if you want, but in Luke 7:33 through 35, Jesus is talking and he says, look, John the Baptist came and he didn't eat any bread and he didn't drink any wine, and you all said that, he must be possessed by a demon because, only someone possessed by a demon is not eating bread and drinking wine. He said, then I come along, the Son of God, and I eat bread and I drink wine, and you say that I'm a glutton and a drunk. Jesus talks about it. He addresses this. Do you think that this wedding needed 908 bottles of wine to survive? No. I think this is a great example that we'll talk about more of, Mary had something in mind to fix this. I can almost guarantee Mary, in her wildest dreams, would never have come up with, hey, can you make 908 bottles of wine? Can you make a couple bottles of wine? Can you fix this? Can you make this problem go away? That's what Mary asked for. And Jesus answered her and said, let me do it my way. Oh, and I'm going to make a hot tub of it. Right? This is what we see. Look at 8 through 10. 8 through 10. And he said to them, now they've just filled it up. They filled it up to the brim. And Jesus said to them, now, draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So this is the person in charge. He's in charge of the food and the wine. This is the person over all of it. He says, take it to the master of the feast. This is the one who you would take food and things to, and he would inspect it, taste it, yes, approve it to go out to the crowd. Take it to him. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now. The master of the feast tastes the wine, and he looks at him and he says, guys, you're doing this backwards. Now, understand, we're not talking about drunks, right? Jewish people had a love for wine. They had scriptural places for wine. They had scriptural basis for wine. They also had scriptural verses, of course, talking about that you don't drink too much wine, that you are not a drunk, that you don't muddle your senses and lose control. So we're not talking about some drunken party, but we are talking about wine. And the master of the feast reinstates that. He's like, look, usually people serve the good stuff first, so that then once people have drank a little bit and muddled their taste buds just enough, then they bring out the poor stuff and nobody knows the difference. You have saved the best for last. Not only did Jesus make an abundance, but he made it beautiful, made it wonderful, made it stand out. Made it stand out. But now, here's the important part. Verse 9 says, the master of the feast did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. So what we know is, we don't know what Mary was thinking, or what Mary thought she was asking, or what Mary wanted. But what we do know is that when Jesus said, I'm going to take care of this in my way, that Jesus didn't walk out into the middle of the wedding feast and perform this like some sort of magic trick. It says he went in the back with the servants, had them fill it up, told them to take it to the master of feast. No explanation given, no story given. We know that the master of the feast didn't even know that the wine had run out. Only Mary. Mary was trying to hide it and make sure that everything was taken care of. Jesus didn't go make some grand announcement. He didn't show this off to everyone. But he made the best for last. Made the best for last. Look at verse 11. Very end of this story, in verse 11, it says, this is the first of his signs, manifested his glory, and his disciples believed him. Now here we get to the point of why John included all of this. The first of his signs. Why was this Jesus' first miracle? Because Mama said so. We don't know. We know this was the first. And we do know that at this point in time, Jesus said, it's not my time. It's not my time yet. And we do know that whoever's wedding it was, Mama asked for it, and Jesus came through, found a way to come through. We know the point was to manifest his glory. All through Scripture, beginning to end, every answer to prayer, every powerful act, every great sign, every wonderful display of love, grace, mercy, power, whatever it is always immediately followed up with, for the glory of God. Did Jesus have compassion for the wedding party, whoever it was, the bride and groom, whoever it was, who this was going to bring great shame? Absolutely. Absolutely. And did he do it with love for them? Yes. But the main point that he did it was to show his glory. But he didn't tell anyone, right? But he told who he wanted and he told who mattered. Look back at verse 50 and 51. You remember Nathanael? He told Nathanael, I saw you sitting under the tree. Nathanael said, surely you're the guy. You are the Messiah. You are God. And he said, so that's all it takes? Like I said, I saw you under the tree and that's what you find so impressive? Surely you will see even greater things than this. Who attended the wedding? Jesus and with his disciples. Nathanael and Philip were there. Jesus performs this act, doesn't do it in front of the crowd, doesn't make some grand announcement, but the disciples knew, Nathanael knew, and in verse 11 it says, and his disciples believed him. Jesus did this sign to show his glory. And oftentimes, as we talked about last week, that can be for the one. It's not always, in fact, it's very, very, very rarely for the 99. It's usually for the one. That one is going to do some amazing things. Jesus is usually for the one. In this one, I believe this entire miracle could have been just for Philip. The feeding of the 5,000, we focus on the 5,000. They saw this miracle and I don't even know if they did see it. That whole thing could have been for the little boy who brought his lunch and gave it to him. Jesus does amazing things, and oftentimes he does it for the one, but he always does it to show his glory. Always does it to show his glory. There are so many things out of these short 11 verses that we can get out of Jesus' character, a display of Jesus' character. One huge one is just joy. Jesus and his disciples were at this wedding feast. They were at this wedding feast. Jesus turned water into wine as a miracle at this wedding feast. And all through Scripture, it's like we talked about last week, where it said, the beginning of the verse said, and the sinners and the tax collectors and the heathens, they were drawn to Jesus. Doesn't say they were scared of Jesus or repulsed by Jesus. It said they were drawn to Jesus. Jesus was a joy-filled person. Jesus had sorrow to the depths that we will never understand. But in his moments of showing time and spending time, Jesus had great joy and talked about joy and said people will know you, yes, by your love, and people will recognize you by your joy. Jesus didn't attend this wedding feast and sit in the back corner with his arms crossed to make sure that everyone knew how much he disapproved of them having fun. Jesus brought his disciples and they attended this joyful feast for a joyful occasion, for a joy-filled couple, and they participated and they were there and they loved it. And because he participated and because he was joyful and enjoying time with friends and family and people that he didn't know, Jesus himself says, you guys have called me a drunk for it. It talks about abundance. The fact that Jesus took 180 gallons of water and said, I can turn it all into wine. It's not necessary. But I can do it because you wanted this. I think Jesus looks at us a lot of times like he looks at Philip and he says, man, you are too easily impressed. You're too easily impressed. How beautiful the analogy also to think about this is us, right? This is our Christian faith, our Christian walk, our Christian life. We are called to have abundant, joyful life now, immediately, here, right now. But Jesus is saving the best for last. even with us. The best is last. He does everything for the one. He does everything for His glory, and He always manifests His glory so that people will believe. All through, when we were walking through the Old Testament, every time God would come and show His character, and He would finish it showing off, He'd said, I did this because I want you to remember me and believe. This one is no different. Every time with Jesus, I want you to remember, and I want you to believe. Want you to believe. In this one, He finishes it up, and it says, and His disciples believed in Him. That was the point. That's what it was all about. What Jesus offers is abundance. It's quantity and it's quality. This is not prosperity. Do not twist this up. Definitely don't twist my words up. That couldn't be further from the truth. There is no such thing as a prosperity gospel. We're not talking about money and riches. We're talking about what Jesus offers in abundant life, in joy, in peace, in hope, in belonging, in purpose, in understanding, in life is abundant, and it is abundant beyond what we could even ask for. We see that verse a lot too. It is quality beyond what we could ever dream of asking for. You ask, I give abundantly. You, as a poor, terrible, earthly parent, you know how to give good gifts. How much more do I know how to give good gifts? All for belief. All so that we can know who God is, know God's character, and understand that the God of the Hebrew Bible that walked through and over and over again told everyone, I love you with a love that will not let go, and I just want you to come home. Jesus continued that message his entire walk here on earth, not because he was something different than the Father, but because he and the Father were one, and he was manifesting God's character and his love and care for everyone that he came in contact with. And that is our calling. Our calling is to mirror Jesus as best as we possibly can, which is really poor, but to mirror Jesus as best as we possibly can. And a lot of that is being able to correctly identify his character so we know what we're supposed to be mirroring. And one of the enormous parts of his character, and that he taught and that he preached and that he showed and that he demonstrated and that he brought his disciples into, was joy, filled with joy. Filled with joy. We as Christians should be looked at as so joy-filled that people know they have got to have something that I don't. They've got to have something I don't. They called Jesus a drunk. They said Peter and the disciples at Pentecost were drunks, and Peter was like, chill out, it's 9 a.m. It's joy, though. It's joy. It's real joy. It's not stoicism. It's not reserved. It's not, angry. It's joy because we know something, and we have confidence that it's not about our character, but it's about God's character. This morning, if we can pray for you in any way, in any of that, if we can pray for you, things going on in your life or with your family or friends or loved ones, in your heart, if we can pray with you. If it's something that you don't want to or can't even talk about, and you just need someone to just sit with you silently for a minute and say a prayer on your behalf, then we would love to do that too. If you want to come this morning and find out more about this God, this Jesus, this character that is God's revealed character, then that is exactly why we are here. If you want to come and talk to us more about this congregation, this body, this church family, or about receiving Christ as Lord over you and submitting to mirroring his great character, we invite you to come this morning. Either down front, there'll be a couple people down here. There'll be some men and women on the back walls back there. You can go grab one of them, and let us just pray with you this morning. Thank you.